The fake police officer stood on my porch, his counterfeit badge gleaming in the morning sun. His partner flanked him, both wearing uniforms that looked official enough to fool most people. But I am not most people. "Sir, we need you to come with us," the first impostor declared with practiced authority. "You are under arrest for violating multiple HOA regulations and state property laws." My blood ran cold, not from fear, but from pure rage. 25 years of law enforcement had taught me to recognize real authority from desperate theater. These criminals had no idea they were threatening the state police chief. They thought they were intimidating some helpless retiree into submission. Behind them, the HOA president smiled with smug satisfaction, believing this was my moment of final defeat. She had orchestrated this elaborate fraud to break me once and for all. That was when I realized these people had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. After 25 years of chasing criminals and dealing with the worst humanity had to offer, I thought I had found my sanctuary. The mountain cabin sat nestled among towering pines, with crystal-clear lakes stretching beyond my back deck. This was supposed to be my peaceful retirement, my reward for decades of serving justice. I remember the day I first drove up that winding mountain road, my wife Sarah beside me, both of us dreaming of quiet mornings and peaceful evenings. The property was everything we had hoped for. 3 acres of pristine forest, a cozy log cabin with a stone fireplace, and neighbors who seemed friendly enough during our initial visits. The real estate agent had mentioned the homeowners association in passing, describing it as a small group that handled basic community maintenance. "Very reasonable people," she assured us. "They just want to keep property values stable and the neighborhood beautiful." Within my first week, I met several HOA board members during what they called a welcome visit. Margaret Henderson, the HOA president, arrived with 2 other board members, all smiles and warm greetings. She was a woman in her 60s with perfectly styled gray hair and the kind of smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Welcome to Pine Ridge Estates," Margaret said, extending her hand. "We are so excited to have a distinguished professional like yourself joining our community." They seemed charming enough, offering helpful tips about local services and community events. But there was something in their tone, a subtle condescension that made me uncomfortable. They spoke about community standards and property value protection with the fervor of true believers. That was when they mentioned the fence. The previous owner had installed a split-rail fence along part of the property line, apparently without proper HOA approval. It was a simple wooden fence, maybe 4 feet high, running along the side yard where it bordered the hiking trail. Nothing elaborate or offensive, just a basic boundary marker. "It is a minor issue," Margaret explained with that same plastic smile. "We just need you to remove it and replant the area with approved native vegetation. The application process is quite simple." I nodded, thinking this would be a straightforward matter. After all, I had spent my career working within systems of rules and regulations. I understood the importance of proper procedures and community cooperation. "Of course," I replied. "Just send me the paperwork and I will take care of it." But as the days passed, I began to notice subtle signs that this community was not quite what it seemed. The HOA's communications were unusually formal and demanding. Their requests read more like court orders than neighborly suggestions. Other residents seemed nervous when discussing the HOA, speaking in hushed tones and glancing around as if afraid of being overheard. During my morning walks, I met an elderly man named Frank who lived 3 houses down. He had been in the community for over a decade, and when I mentioned the fence issue, His expression darkened. "Be careful with them," he whispered, looking around nervously. "They are not as reasonable as they pretend to be. Once they get their hooks in you, they do not let go." I filed his warning away, still believing that reasonable people could resolve reasonable problems. But deep in my gut, the instincts that had kept me alive through decades of police work were starting to stir. Something was not right in this perfect mountain paradise. The mask began to slip during my second week. What started as a simple fence removal request quickly escalated into something far more sinister. Margaret Henderson scheduled a compliance meeting at my home, arriving with her entire board of directors like some kind of corporate invasion force. "We have reviewed your property more thoroughly," Margaret announced, consulting a thick folder of documents. "The fence issue is more complex than initially assessed." She spread photographs across my kitchen table, each one showing different angles of the innocent split-rail fence. Her tone had shifted from neighborly concern to prosecutorial accusation. "This fence violates multiple sections of our community guidelines," she continued. "Section 4.2 regarding boundary improvements, Section 7.1 concerning visual aesthetics, and Section 12.3 about environmental impact." I stared at the photos, then at the serious faces around my table. These people were treating a simple wooden fence like a major crime scene. "I understand," I said carefully. "Just tell me what you need me to do and I will do it." Margaret exchanged glances with her board members before delivering her next bombshell. "The removal process requires a certified environmental impact study, professional surveying, and restoration using only approved native species planted by licensed contractors." The estimated cost was over $8,000. $8,000, I repeated, unable to hide my shock, to remove a simple fence. "Community standards are not negotiable," Margaret replied coldly. "Property values depend on strict adherence to our guidelines." That was when I realized this was not about the fence at all. This was about power and control. These people had tasted authority and become drunk on it, using their positions to dominate and humiliate their neighbors. Over the following days, I began hearing stories from other residents. Frank, the elderly man who had warned me, shared his own horror story about a mailbox that did not meet HOA specifications. He had spent $3,000 replacing it with an approved model, only to be fined again for the color of the post. "They fined me every week until I complied," he said, his voice shaking with remembered anger. $500 every week for 2 months. I had to choose between eating and paying their ridiculous fines. Sarah, my wife, watched me process these stories with growing concern. "Maybe we should just pay the fees and move on," she suggested. "It is not worth the stress." But my law enforcement instincts were fully awake now. I recognized the pattern of systematic bullying and financial extortion. These people were operating like a criminal enterprise, using their legal authority to terrorize residents into compliance. The final straw came when Margaret delivered my first official fine: $1,000 for failure to initiate compliance procedures within the specified time frame. I had owned the property for exactly 3 weeks. "This is extortion," I told her during our phone conversation. "This is community standards," she replied with icy satisfaction. "You agreed to these terms when you purchased your property. If you cannot afford to maintain community standards, perhaps you should consider selling." The threat was clear: submit or be driven out. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I was not going to roll over and let these petty tyrants destroy my retirement dream. I had spent my career fighting bullies and criminals. I was not about to stop now. I pulled out my laptop and began researching the HOA's legal standing, their bylaws, and their compliance with state and federal regulations. If they wanted to play hardball, I would show them what real authority looked like. But first, I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. I had a feeling that the fence dispute was just the tip of a much larger iceberg. As I worked late into the night, Sarah brought me coffee and sat down beside me. "What are you planning?" she asked. "I am going to teach them what happens when you mess with the wrong person," I replied, not looking up from my screen. The war had begun. The harassment escalated with military precision. Every day brought new fines, new violations, new impossible demands. Margaret Henderson had clearly decided to make an example of me, and she was pulling out all the stops. First came the landscaping violations. Apparently, my natural mountain landscaping did not meet their aesthetic standards. $500 fine. Then the driveway infractions. My gravel driveway was inconsistent with community visual harmony. Another $750. The most ridiculous was the unauthorized outdoor furniture violation. My simple wooden deck chairs were deemed incompatible with approved outdoor decor guidelines. $1,000 fine. In 2 weeks, they had fined me over $4,000 for things that were perfectly normal when I bought the property. The message was clear: submit or face financial ruin. I decided to try reasoning with individual board members, hoping to find someone with basic human decency. I called David Morrison, the HOA treasurer, and arranged a private meeting. "Look, David," I said over coffee at a local diner, "this is getting out of hand. I am not trying to cause trouble. I just want to live peacefully in my home." David shifted uncomfortably, glancing around as if afraid we might be overheard. "I wish I could help you," he said quietly, "but Margaret has made this a test case. She says if we let you slide, other residents will think they can ignore the rules." "What rules?" I asked. "I have read the original HOA bylaws. None of these violations are mentioned in the official documents." David's face went pale. "You read the bylaws?" "Of course I did. I am a professional. I always read the fine print." That was when I realized they had been making up rules as they went along, inventing violations to justify their extortion scheme. David excused himself quickly, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation. My research was revealing disturbing patterns. The HOA had been operating far outside their legal authority for years. They were collecting fines for violations that did not exist in their governing documents. They were demanding compliance with standards that had never been officially adopted. They were, in essence, running a criminal enterprise. I began documenting everything. Every fine, every interaction, every threat. My law enforcement training kicked in as I built a case that would make any prosecutor salivate. But the HOA was not finished with me. Margaret called an emergency meeting, demanding my appearance at the community center. When I arrived, I found myself facing the entire board plus several other residents who had been encouraged to attend. "We have reached a decision regarding your continued noncompliance," Margaret announced from behind a folding table that she had arranged like a judicial bench. "Effective immediately, we are placing a lien on your property for unpaid fines and violations." The room fell silent. Even the other residents seemed shocked by this escalation. "You cannot place a lien on my property," I said calmly. "You do not have that authority." Margaret smiled that cold smile. "We have whatever authority we choose to exercise. This is our community, and we protect it from people who refuse to respect our standards. That was when she made her biggest mistake. She stood up and pointed directly at me, her voice rising with self-righteous anger. You think you can come into our community and ignore our rules. You think you are better than us. Well, let me tell you something, Mr. Big Shot. We have dealt with your type before. We have ways of making people comply, and if you think you can fight us, you are sadly mistaken. The threat was clear and public. Everyone in the room heard it. I stood up slowly, my voice deadly calm. Are you threatening me? I am promising you, Margaret replied. We will make your life so miserable that you will beg us to let you sell your property and leave. That night, Sarah and I sat on our deck, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. The beauty of the setting felt mocked by the ugliness of our situation. What are we going to do? Sarah asked. We are going to fight, I replied. These people have forgotten that actions have consequences. They have been bullying people for so long that they think they are untouchable. I pulled out my phone and made a call to an old friend in the Attorney General's office. It was time to remind Margaret Henderson and her board that there were bigger fish in the pond. The real war was about to begin. I spent the next month playing the role of a defeated homeowner while secretly building the strongest case of my career. My law enforcement contacts proved invaluable as I assembled a team of experts who owed me favors from my years of service. Detective Sarah Chen from the State Financial Crimes Unit helped me trace the HOA's money trail. What we discovered was staggering. Over the past 5 years, the HOA had collected over $200,000 in fines and fees that had no basis in their governing documents. This is textbook extortion, Sarah told me during one of our clandestine meetings. They are using their perceived authority to extract money from residents through threats and intimidation. Attorney Mike Rodriguez, who had worked with me on several corruption cases, reviewed the HOA's bylaws and operating procedures. His analysis confirmed my suspicions. They are operating completely outside their legal authority, Mike explained. Half of these rules they are enforcing were never officially adopted. The other half violate state property laws. But I needed more than legal violations. I needed them to commit a crime so serious that it would destroy their organization completely. That opportunity came when Frank, my elderly neighbor, approached me with a disturbing story. They are planning something big, he whispered during one of our morning walks. I heard Margaret on the phone with someone. She was talking about bringing in outside help to deal with you. What kind of outside help? I asked. She mentioned something about police impersonators, people who could scare you into compliance. My blood ran cold. Police impersonation was a federal crime, and if they were stupid enough to try it, they would hand me everything I needed to destroy them. I began preparing for their next move. Hidden cameras were installed around my property. Audio recording devices were placed in strategic locations. I contacted my replacement at the state police and briefed him on the situation. You want us to let them actually attempt this? Chief Williams asked in disbelief. I need them to commit the crime, I explained. If we move too early, they will just claim it was a misunderstanding. I need them to cross the line completely. The waiting was the hardest part. I had to endure weeks of escalating harassment while pretending to be intimidated and defeated. Margaret increased the fines to impossible levels. The HOA began threatening to foreclose on my property. They sent certified letters demanding immediate payment of over $20,000 in accumulated fines. To any normal resident, this would have been devastating, but I was not any normal resident. The breakthrough came when David Morrison, the treasurer, approached me privately one evening. He looked terrified and guilt-ridden. "I cannot be part of this anymore," he confessed. "Margaret has gone completely insane. She is planning to have people dress up as police officers and arrest you." "When?" I asked. "Tomorrow morning. She hired some guys from out of state. They have fake badges and uniforms. They are going to tell you that you are under arrest for violating state property laws." David handed me a piece of paper with trembling hands. "This is their script. Margaret wrote it herself." I read the document with growing amazement. It was a detailed plan to terrorize me into submission using criminal impersonation of law enforcement officers. Margaret had even included specific threats about jail time and criminal charges. "She thinks this will break you," David said. "She told the board that once you see police officers at your door, you will do whatever she demands." That night I made final preparations. My recording equipment was tested and ready. My contacts in law enforcement were standing by. Sarah packed a bag and went to stay with her sister, not wanting to be present for what was about to unfold. I sat on my deck in the darkness, watching the stars and thinking about the incredible stupidity of people who mistake temporary authority for permanent power. Margaret Henderson and her board had convinced themselves they were untouchable. They had bullied residents for so long that they believed they could commit any crime without consequences. Tomorrow morning would shatter that illusion forever. I checked my phone one last time, confirming that real police units were positioned nearby but out of sight. Everything was ready. Margaret Henderson wanted to play with fake police officers. Tomorrow, she would learn the difference between theatrical authority and the real thing. The trap was set. All I had to do was wait for them to spring it. The fake police officers arrived at exactly 9 o'clock in the morning, just as David Morrison had predicted. I watched from my kitchen window as two men in realistic police uniforms approached my front door. Their badges looked official, their uniforms were properly pressed, and they carried themselves with practiced authority. If I had been anyone else, I might have been fooled. I opened the door and stepped onto my porch, playing the role of a confused and intimidated homeowner. "Officers," I said, my voice deliberately uncertain, "is there a problem?" The taller of the two impostors stepped forward, his hand resting on what appeared to be a service weapon. "Sir, I am Officer Johnson with the State Property Enforcement Division. We have multiple warrants for your arrest related to violations of state property laws and HOA regulations." I had to admire their preparation. They had even created a fictional police division that sounded official enough to fool most people. But my trained eye caught the details that exposed their fraud. The badges were close but not perfect. The uniforms were missing specific insignia that real state police would have. Most importantly, their body language was wrong. They carried themselves like actors playing a role, not like real officers with genuine authority. "I do not understand," I replied, maintaining my confused homeowner act. "What warrants?" The second impostor, who had introduced himself as Officer Davis, pulled out a folder of official-looking documents. "You are in violation of multiple state statutes regarding property maintenance, environmental compliance, and community standards." They began reading from their script, detailing fictitious laws and regulations that supposedly gave them authority to arrest me. It was an impressive performance, complete with legal-sounding language and official procedures. That was when Margaret Henderson made her grand entrance. She walked up my driveway with the triumphant smile of someone who believed she had finally won. Behind her came two other HOA board members, all of them eager to witness my complete humiliation. "I tried to warn you," Margaret said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "But you would not listen. Now you have forced us to take more serious action." The fake officers continued their performance, explaining how I would be arrested and charged with multiple felonies unless I agreed to immediate compliance with all HOA demands. They had prepared a document that would give the HOA complete control over my property, including the authority to make any changes they deemed necessary at my expense. "All you have to do is sign this agreement," Officer Johnson explained, "and we can avoid the arrest and prosecution process." Margaret stepped closer, her eyes shining with victory. "This is your last chance," she said. "Sign the agreement, pay all outstanding fines, and comply with all our requirements. Otherwise, you will be going to jail." I looked at the fake officers, then at Margaret and her board members. The moment had arrived. They had committed multiple felonies in front of hidden cameras and recording devices. They had impersonated police officers, made false arrest threats, and attempted to extort money through intimidation. It was time to reveal who they were really dealing with. I straightened up, my entire demeanor changing from confused homeowner to commanding law enforcement officer. "Gentlemen," I said, my voice cutting through the morning air like a blade, "I am going to need to see your real identification." The fake officers exchanged nervous glances. "Sir, we have already shown you our credentials," Officer Johnson replied, but his confidence was wavering. I pulled out my wallet and displayed my official state police chief identification. "I am Chief Robert Martinez, State Police. You are both under arrest for impersonating police officers, making false threats, and conspiracy to commit extortion." The effect was instantaneous and devastating. The fake officers' faces went white as they realized the magnitude of their mistake. Margaret Henderson's triumphant smile melted into an expression of pure terror. "This is impossible," she whispered. "You are just a retiree." "I am the state police chief," I replied calmly, "and you have just committed multiple felonies in front of recording devices and witnesses." Officer Johnson tried to run, but I had been expecting that. "I would not recommend it," I called out. "My officers are surrounding the property as we speak." On cue, real police vehicles appeared from their concealed positions, their sirens wailing as they converged on my property. The contrast between the professional law enforcement officers and the criminal impersonators could not have been more stark. Margaret Henderson collapsed into one of my deck chairs, her face in her hands. "This cannot be happening," she moaned. "This is exactly what happens when you mess with the wrong person," I replied. The perfect storm had finally arrived. The next 4 hours unfolded with the precision of a military operation. Real police officers flooded my property, securing evidence and processing the crime scene with professional efficiency. The fake officers were handcuffed and read their rights, while Margaret Henderson and her board members watched their world collapse around them. Detective Sarah Chen arrived to take charge of the financial crimes investigation. She had brought a team of forensic accountants who immediately began seizing HOA records and financial documents. The scope of the criminal enterprise was becoming clear with each passing hour. "Chief Martinez," Detective Chen reported, "we have found evidence of systematic fraud dating back over 5 years. The HOA has been operating an illegal extortion scheme that has generated hundreds of thousands of dollars in fraudulent fines." The fake officers, whose real names were Thomas Brady and Marcus Williams, were career criminals with extensive records of fraud and impersonation. They had been hired by Margaret Henderson through a contact she had found online, paying them $5,000 to terrorize me into submission. She told us you were just some old retiree who was causing trouble, Brady confessed during his interrogation. She never mentioned you were a cop. Margaret Henderson was arrested on charges of conspiracy to commit extortion, hiring criminals to impersonate police officers, and fraud. Her shocked protestations of innocence fell on deaf ears as investigators uncovered the full extent of her illegal activities. The search of the HOA offices revealed a treasure trove of evidence. Financial records showed systematic theft of resident funds. Email communications documented years of illegal harassment and intimidation. Board meeting minutes revealed discussions about problem residents and strategies for driving them out of the community. But the most damning evidence was Margaret's own documentation of the fake police scheme. She had kept detailed records of her communications with the criminal impersonators, including copies of their fake badges and uniforms. Her obsession with controlling every detail had provided prosecutors with an airtight case. Word of the arrest spread through the community like wildfire. Residents who had suffered years of abuse suddenly found their voices, coming forward with stories of harassment, illegal fines, and systematic intimidation. Frank, my elderly neighbor, was among the first to speak with investigators. "They find me for everything," he told Detective Chen. "The color of my mailbox, the type of flowers in my garden, even the way I parked my car in my own driveway." Mrs. Rodriguez, who lived on the other side of the community, had been threatened with foreclosure for refusing to replace her roof with approved materials. The HOA had demanded she spend $30,000 on unnecessary roof work or face legal action. "I was ready to sell my house and move," she said through tears. "I could not afford to fight them anymore." The local media picked up the story, and it quickly became a sensation. The image of fake police officers being arrested at the home of the real state police chief was too compelling to ignore. News vans lined the streets of Pine Ridge Estates as reporters competed to cover the story. Channel 7 News anchor Lisa Thompson interviewed me on my deck, with the mountain landscape providing a dramatic backdrop. "Chief Martinez, how did you maintain your composure during such an elaborate criminal scheme?" 25 years of law enforcement taught me the value of patience and preparation," I replied. "These people thought they could intimidate me because they had never encountered real consequences for their actions." The interview aired that evening, and the response was overwhelming. Homeowners from across the state began contacting the Attorney General's office with similar stories of HOA abuse and corruption. What started as a simple fence dispute had sparked a statewide investigation into HOA crimes. Federal prosecutors became involved when they discovered that the fake officers had crossed state lines to commit their crimes. The FBI launched a broader investigation into organized impersonation schemes targeting homeowners across multiple states. Margaret Henderson's bail was set at $100,000, which she could not afford after the HOA's assets were frozen pending the criminal investigation. She would remain in jail until her trial, giving her plenty of time to contemplate the consequences of her actions. The fake officers faced federal charges that carried minimum sentences of 10 years in prison. Their criminal careers had finally caught up with them in the most spectacular way possible. David Morrison, the HOA treasurer who had warned me about the scheme, agreed to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for reduced charges. His testimony provided crucial evidence about the systematic nature of the HOA's criminal activities. "Margaret kept detailed records of everything," he testified. She had files on every resident, documenting their weaknesses and how to pressure them into compliance. The community that had lived in fear for years was finally free. The reign of terror that had masqueraded as community standards was over. Justice had been served, but the story was far from finished. 6 months later, I stood in the same courtroom where I had testified in countless criminal cases throughout my career. This time, I was watching justice be served to those who had terrorized my community for years. Margaret Henderson received a sentence of 8 years in federal prison for conspiracy, fraud, and hearing criminal impersonators. The judge was particularly harsh in her sentencing remarks. "You used your position of trust to prey upon vulnerable residents," Judge Patricia Williams declared. "You turned a homeowners association into a criminal enterprise designed to extort money and terrorize innocent people." The fake officers, Brady and Williams, received 12-year sentences for their roles in the impersonation scheme. Their extensive criminal histories and the interstate nature of their crimes had convinced the judge that maximum sentences were appropriate. This case represents a particularly egregious abuse of the public trust in law enforcement, Judge Williams continued. Impersonating police officers strikes at the very heart of our justice system. The civil proceedings provided additional satisfaction. The courts ordered the HOA to pay full restitution to all affected residents, including punitive damages for the years of harassment and illegal fines. The total settlement exceeded $500,000. My own settlement was substantial, but more importantly, it established legal precedent for other homeowners facing similar abuse. The case became a landmark in HOA law, cited in textbooks and used as a training example for law enforcement agencies. The community underwent a complete transformation. New HOA leadership was elected with transparency and accountability as their primary goals. The new board implemented systems to prevent future abuse, including resident oversight committees and mandatory legal review of all enforcement actions. My fence issue, the original catalyst for this entire saga, was resolved with community cooperation and goodwill. The new HOA board determined that the fence was actually beneficial to the community, providing a clear boundary between private property and the public hiking trail. "We should be thanking you for maintaining the trail boundary," new HOA President Jennifer Walsh told me during a community meeting. "The previous board created problems where none existed." The story had broader implications beyond our small community. The Attorney General's office used our case to launch a statewide investigation into HOA abuse. Over 24 communities were found to have similar problems, leading to new legislation strengthening homeowner protections. I was invited to speak at law enforcement conferences about the case, sharing lessons learned about white-collar crime and community corruption. The story became a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked authority and the importance of professional integrity. "The badge and uniform are symbols of public trust," I told audiences. "When criminals impersonate law enforcement, they attack the very foundation of our justice system." My retirement finally became what Sarah and I had always dreamed it would be. Our mountain cabin truly became a sanctuary, surrounded by neighbors who had become friends and a community that functioned as communities should. Frank, my elderly neighbor who had first warned me about the HOA, became a regular visitor. We would sit on my deck in the evenings, watching the sunset paint the mountains in brilliant colors. "I never thought I would see the day when we would be free of them," he said during one of our conversations. "You gave us our community back." The fence that had started it all still stands, a simple wooden barrier that had somehow become a symbol of resistance against tyranny. Visitors to our community often ask about it, and I always tell them the same thing. It is not about the fence, I explain. It is about the principle that bullies should not be allowed to terrorize innocent people without consequences. Sarah and I often reflect on the lessons learned from our ordeal. We discovered that evil can flourish in the most unexpected places, but also that good people can triumph when they stand up for what is right. The law enforcement community recognized my work on the case with a special commendation for service above and beyond the call of duty. But the real reward was seeing our community heal and prosper under honest leadership. Margaret Henderson's cell in federal prison is a far cry from the boardroom where she once wielded absolute power. I sometimes wonder if she understands the irony that her obsession with control ultimately led to her complete loss of freedom. The fake officers learned that impersonating law enforcement carries serious consequences. Their criminal careers ended in spectacular fashion, providing a deterrent to others who might consider similar schemes. As I write this story, I am sitting on my deck, watching the morning mist rise from the lake. The peace I sought in retirement has finally arrived, earned through conflict but secured through justice. The mountains stand eternal, unchanged by human drama, but witness to the truth that bullies can be defeated when good people refuse to surrender. Sometimes the fence is worth defending.